Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we drift into a city that never quite cools, where the air itself feels alive, thick with river breath and the faint sweetness of distant sugar. You arrive before sunrise when New Orleans is still deciding whether to sleep a little longer or begin again. The sky is a soft grey, not yet light, and the Mississippi moves beside you with a slow, steady confidence, as if it has seen every version of this morning before. You probably would not survive this, at least not comfortably. The heat does not wait for the sun. It lingers from yesterday, held in the wood of the building, the stones under your feet, the very air you draw into your lungs. It wraps around you like a damp cloth that no one intends to remove. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and the time where you are right now. Now dim the lights. You stand near the levee where the city meets the river without quite trusting it. The water is dark, reflecting only the faintest hint of morning, and it carries a smell that is not unpleasant but heavy. Mud vegetation, something old and constant. The Mississippi is not a quiet river. Even now, before the day has properly begun, you hear it shifting, pressing, moving with purpose. A widely accepted historical fact is that by the 1890s, New Orleans remained one of the busiest ports in the United States, its life tied almost entirely to this river. Everything you will see today, every street and building, every person moving through the city is shaped by this slow, relentless flow of water. You notice movement before you hear voices. A figure passes behind you, boots soft against the packed earth, then another. Men who wake before the sun out because the river does not wait for comfort. Their shapes are still blurred in the dim light, but their direction is clear. Toward the docks, toward work that begins before most people have even opened their eyes. You shift your weight slightly, feeling the ground beneath you. It is firm but not dry. There is always a hint of moisture here, as if the river refuses to stay entirely within its boundaries. You imagine how this place must feel after heavy rain, or worse, when the river rises just a little too high. The thought lingers, then settles somewhere in the back of your mind. There is a quiet detail that often surprises people. In parts of New Orleans, especially near the river, the ground sits at or even below sea level. The city depends on levees and careful management to keep the water where it belongs, or at least where people hope it will stay. A cart rolls past you now, its wooden wheels creaking softly. The sound is steady, almost comforting, like a slow rhythm marking the beginning of the day. The driver does not look at you. He is focused already inside the routine of his morning. You catch a glimpse of what he carries. Sacks stacked carefully tied with rope. Cotton, perhaps. Or grain. Or something that arrived by boat in the night and now needs to move inland before the heat grows heavier. You take a slow breath. The air feels thick but not unpleasant in this early hour. There is a softness to it, a kind of quiet that will not last much longer. You can sense the city behind you, not yet loud but not asleep either. A few distant sounds reach you. A door opening. A voice low and brief. The faint clatter of something being set down. You turn slightly, looking back toward the streets. The buildings are still mostly in shadow, their shapes softened by the low light. Balconies hang above narrow roads, their ironwork dark against the pale sky. Shutters remain closed on many windows, holding in what little coolness the night offered. There is a certain stillness here that feels almost deliberate. Not silence, but a pause. You begin to walk slowly without urgency. The ground changes beneath your feet as you leave the levee, moving onto streets that feel more defined though not entirely even. You notice the way the air shifts slightly as you step between buildings. Less open, more contained. A small, almost curious detail comes to mind. In the late 19th century, ice was already a valued commodity in New Orleans, shipped down from colder regions and stored, carefully used by those who could afford it to bring a brief moment of relief from the heat. You imagine a block of ice wrapped and guarded, slowly melting in a wooden box, a luxury that disappears even as it is used. Ahead of you, a doorway opens. A woman steps out, pausing for a moment as if to measure the morning. She carries a basket covered with cloth and her movements are quiet but practiced. She does not rush. There is time, at least for now. You watch as she adjusts the basket slightly, then begins to walk in the opposite direction, her steps steady, her path already known. You continue forward. The light is changing now. Not suddenly, but gradually, as if someone is slowly turning a dial. The sky lifts from grey to something softer, more defined. Edges sharpen. Details return. The city becomes clearer, though not yet loud. You pass a building where the shutters are partially open. Inside you catch a glimpse of the movement. Someone already at work. The sound is faint but rhythmic. A tool perhaps, or hands moving through a familiar task that does not require full light. There is something about this moment that feels balanced. Not yet demanding. Not yet overwhelming. Just enough. You might wonder how people here manage day after day in this climate, in this constant presence of heat and humidity. Historians still argue whether the routines of early rising and midday slowing developed purely as a response to the environment, or were also shaped by cultural habits brought from Europe and the Caribbean. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps it is something that no one fully notices until they leave and try to live differently. You feel your own pace settling. There is no need to hurry. Not yet. A distant sound reaches you again, slightly clearer now. A voice calling out not loudly but with purpose, another answers. The exchange is brief, practical. Work being arranged. Tasks already in motion. You walk past a narrow alley where the air feels cooler for just a moment, shaded and still. The ground here is darker, holding the memory of yesterday's moisture. You notice how the city seems to breathe differently in these small spaces, as if each corner has its own rhythm. Then as you step back into the street, the air wraps around you again, familiar now, present. There is a strange, almost charming belief that circulated among some residents and visitors in the 19th century. A few claimed that the heavy, humid air of New Orleans could actually preserve health if one simply adapted to it slowly enough, as if the body could learn to live within the heat rather than resist it. It sounds comforting, perhaps even convincing in a quiet moment like this. But you are not entirely sure. The city continues to wake, and you, without quite realizing it, have already become part of its rhythm. You continue forward and the city begins to gather itself around you in a more deliberate way. The softness of early dawn is fading, replaced by the something slightly more defined, though still unhurried. The light settles along the edges of buildings, catching the ironwork of balconies and the worn textures of wood and brick. Nothing feels rushed, but everything feels ready. A man passes you carrying 2 buckets balanced carefully at his sides. The water inside shifts with each step, catching what little light there is and reflecting it in small moving flashes. You hear the faint slosh, steady and rhythmic, almost matching the pace of your own steps. He does not look at you. His attention is on the ground ahead, on not spilling what he carries, on completing a task that likely repeats itself every morning. You begin to notice the smells more clearly now. At first, they arrive in layers. Damp earth, river air lingering behind you. Then something warmer. Bread perhaps just beginning to bake somewhere nearby. It is faint but distinct enough to draw your attention. You follow it for a moment without thinking, your path shifting slightly as if guided by the instinct rather than intention. A widely recognized detail of daily life in cities like this is how much the morning is shaped by smell before sight fully takes over. Bakeries begin early, often before the streets are busy, filling entire blocks with the promise of food before anyone has had time to feel properly hungry. You pass a doorway where the smell strengthens. Inside you can hear movement, not loud, not chaotic, but constant. Hand-working dough, wood shifting, a soft thud as something is set down. You imagine the warmth inside, the contrast between the oven's heat and the still cool air outside, though even that coolness is already fading. You keep walking. The street widens slightly ahead, and with it the sounds begin to gather. Wheels against stone. A horse shifting its weight, the faint clink of harness and metal. Voices still low but no longer isolated. They overlap now, creating a kind of quiet background that feels less like noise and more like presence. You notice how the ground changes again beneath your feet. In some places it is smoother worn by years of use, in others uneven holding small dips where water might collect after rain. You imagine how different this path must feel under a sudden downpour, when the city briefly becomes something closer to water than land. There is a small practical truth here that often goes unnoticed. In the 1890s, many streets in New Orleans were still only partially paved and drainage was inconsistent. After heavy rain, entire areas could become muddy, difficult to cross and slow to dry in the humid air. What feels manageable now could quickly become something else entirely. A cart passes you from the opposite direction, moving slightly faster than the others you have seen. The driver calls out softly, not in alarm, but as a way of clearing his path. You step aside without thinking, letting the cart roll past. The wheels leave faint marks behind temporary lines that will disappear as the day continues. You take another slow breath. The air is warmer now, not dramatically, but enough that you notice the difference. It rests more heavily against your skin, less like a passing sensation and more like something that intends to stay. You feel it along your neck, your hands, the back of your arms. A reminder that the day is only just beginning. A group of men stands near the corner ahead, their conversation low but animated. You catch fragments as you pass, words that shift between languages, blending in a way that feels natural here. English, yes, but also French and something else you cannot quite place. Italian, perhaps, or Spanish. The sounds overlap, not competing, but coexisting. New Orleans in this period is known for this layered identity, a place where multiple languages and cultures meet not in isolation but in daily life. People move between them with ease, sometimes within the same sentence, creating a rhythm that feels unique to this city. You continue forward and the buildings begin to open, slightly creating small pockets of space where the light settles more fully. A woman sweeps the front of her doorway, the motion slow and steady. The broom brushes against the ground in a soft, repetitive sound that seems to mark time more gently than any clock. She pauses briefly as you pass, not in greeting but in acknowledgement. Then she resumes her attention, returning to the small, careful task that keeps her space in order. There is something about these small actions that feels grounding, simple, necessary. A curious tidbit from this era suggests that some residents believed early morning sweeping was not just practical, but symbolic, a way of clearing away not only dust but the remnants of the previous day. Whether taken seriously or simply followed out of habit, the act itself remains. You walk on. The street narrows again and the light shifts with it, creating alternating patterns of brightness and shadow. You notice how your pace adjusts without conscious effort. Slower in the shade, slightly quicker in the open, as if your body is already responding to the environment in ways you do not need to think about. A door closes somewhere behind you. Another opens ahead. The city is no longer waking. It is awake. You hear footsteps approaching, then passing. A child moving quickly, perhaps sent on an errand. The energy is different from the adults around you. Less measured, more immediate. It passes through the space like a brief gust of wind, then disappears into the growing activity of the street. You begin to feel a subtle shift inside yourself as well. Not urgency, but awareness. You are no longer observing from a distance, you are moving within it, adjusting your pace, your attention, your expectations. The rhythm is not something you watch, it is something you begin to follow. Oh, there is a question that lingers quietly beneath all of this. How much of a city's identity is shaped by its environment and how much by the people who learn to live within it? Historians still debate whether New Orleans became what it is because of the river and the climate, or whether its people through habit and adaptation shaped the city into something uniquely suited to both. You're not sure there is a clear answer. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps it is something that cannot be separated. You pass another open window and this time the sound is clearer. Music faint but very present. Not a full melody, just a few notes repeated softly. Someone practicing, perhaps, or simply playing for themselves in the quiet of the morning. The sound lingers as you move past, then fades behind you. You realize that the city is not just waking through movement and work. It is waking through sound, through smell, through light, and through you walking steadily without hurry, already part of something that does not need to announce itself to be felt. You step through a doorway that opens just enough to let you pass, and the street's growing movement softens behind you. Inside, the air feels different at once. Not cool, not truly, but quieter, held in place by walls that seem to understand the day outside and are already preparing for it. The light is filtered here. It slips through the shutters in narrow lines, breaking into soft patterns across the floor. You notice how deliberative it feels, as if the house is not trying to keep the light out entirely, only to control how it enters. The brightness is gentle, shaped into something that does not demand attention. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust. The room is simple but not empty. A table worn smooth by years of use. Chairs placed with a kind of quiet order. Fabric draped in places where it might catch a breeze if one happens to pass through. Everything seems arranged not for decoration, but for living in a place where the heat never quite leaves. A commonly understood feature of homes in New Orleans during this time is their design for airflow. High ceilings, tall windows, and long narrow layouts allow air to move more freely through the space. It is not comfort in the modern sense, but it is a careful attempt at relief. You take a slow breath. The air inside carries a different set of scents. Faint traces of last night's meal, wood, fabric, hint of something sweet perhaps from fruit or preserves kept nearby. These smells do not compete. They settle into each other, forming a kind of background that feels steady and familiar. A curtain shifts sluggishly near the back of the room. You watch it for a moment, noticing how even the smallest movement of air becomes visible here. It is not strong enough to cool, but enough to remind you that the space is not entirely still. The house breathes in its own quiet way. You move further inside. Your hand brushes lightly against the surface of the table as you pass. It feels warm already, holding on to the memory of yesterday's heat. You imagine how it will feel by afternoon when the air outside presses harder against the walls and the inside becomes something closer to shelter than escape. There is a small detail that feels almost surprising. In wealthier homes, people sometimes used large blocks of imported ice placed carefully in basins or cabinets to cool small areas or drinks. It was not common and certainly not lasting, but for a short time it could change how a room felt. You imagine the slow drip of melting water, the quiet luxury of a moment that cannot be extended. You step toward a window. The shutters are partially open angle to let in light but limit the direct heat. You adjust them slightly, just enough to see outside more clearly. The street is brighter now. Movement has increased. People pass more frequently, their steps more certain, their paths more direct. Inside, however, the pace remains slower. There is no rush here, only preparation. A woman moves through the space behind you, her steps soft but purposeful. She carries a cloth which she uses to wipe the surface of the table in slow, even strokes. The motion is not hurried. It does not need to be. Each pass of the cloth feels complete, as if the task itself sets its own rhythm. You notice how she pauses briefly near the window, adjusting the shutters again just slightly. Not closing them, not opening them fully, but finding a balance that feels right for the moment. It is a small action, but it speaks of experience of knowing how the light and heat will change as the day continues. You step aside, giving her space. Your attention shifts to the back of the house, where a doorway leads to a small courtyard. You move toward it, curious, and step outside into a space that feels both open and enclosed at the same time. The courtyard is quiet. Plants grow here, their leaves heavy with moisture. The ground is uneven, a mix of sown and earth that holds the dampness more easily than the street outside. The air feels thicker here, but also calmer, as if the walls surrounding the space have softened the movement of everything within it. You hear a faint drip, water somewhere unseen falling at regular intervals. The sound is gentle, almost soothing, and it blends with the distant noise of the city beyond the walls. A lesser-known observation from this period suggests that interior courtyards were not only practical for ventilation, but also served as small private worlds within the city's spaces, where families could step away from the constant presence of the street. Whether by design or by habit, these areas offered a different kind of quiet. You stand there for a moment, letting the stillness settle around you. The heat is present, but not yet overwhelming. The light is soft filtered through leaves and walls. Time feels slower here. You return inside, and the contrast is subtle but noticeable. The room feels slightly more enclosed after the courtyard, but also more controlled. You understand now how each part of the house serves a purpose, not in isolation, but as part of a system designed to manage something that cannot be removed. The heat. You move toward a chair and sit, if only for a moment. The wood is firm beneath you, not uncomfortable, but not inviting you to linger too long either. You imagine how different this space must feel at midday, when the outside air presses harder and the inside becomes a place to endure rather than relax. There is a question that lingers quietly. Did people here grow used to this, truly comfortable in a way that you cannot yet understand, or did they simply learn to live with it, adjusting their expectations until the discomfort became something ordinary? Historians continue to examine whether the architecture of New Orleans homes was primarily influenced by European styles adapted to a new climate, or whether local innovations played a larger role in shaping what became a distinct regional design. The answer, like many things here, is likely a blend. You stand again. The room feels slightly different now, not because it has changed, but because you have begun to understand it. The placement of objects, the angle of shutters, the flow between spaces, none of it is accidental. It's all part of a quiet negotiation with the day. You move back toward the door. As you open it, the outside air meets you again, warmer now, more assertive. The sounds of the street return fuller, more layered. The city has moved beyond waking. It is fully in motion. You step out, carrying with you the memory of the house, the filtered light, the slow movements, the careful balance between inside and outside. And as the door closes behind you, you realize that surviving this place is not about escaping the heat. It is about learning how to move with it. You step back into the street, and the day meets you more fully now. The softness of early morning has given way to something warmer, more active, though still not hurried in a way that feels overwhelming. Instead, everything seems to move with quiet purpose, as if each person already knows where they belong within the flow. The smell reaches you first, stronger than before. Bread, yes, but also coffee, now rich and dark, carried through the air in a way that feels almost guiding. You follow it without thinking, your path bending slightly as the scent becomes more defined. It leads you toward a wider space where the street opens into a market area already alive with movement. Voices overlap here, not loud, not chaotic, but layered. Each conversation distinct, yet blending into something continuous. You hear greeting, brief negotiations, familiar exchanges that seem to repeat each morning with small variations. A grounded historical detail is that public markets were central to daily life in New Orleans during the late 19th century, with places like the French market serving as key hubs for food distribution, social interaction, and cultural exchange. What you're stepping into is not unusual, it is essential. You move slowly along the edge, letting the space reveal itself. Tables stretch in rows, some covered, others open to the air. Goods are arranged with care, not for display alone, but for easy handling. Baskets of vegetables, their colours muted in the early light. Fish laid out on crushed ice that glistens faintly, already beginning its slow surrender to the heat. Cuts of meat carefully placed, attended by sellers who watch everything with steady attention. You notice how people move here, not wandering, not rushing, but weaving. Each person follows a path shaped by habit, pausing where needed, exchanging words, then moving on. There is a rhythm to it that feels almost like music, though quieter, more grounded. You pass a stall where coffee is being poured into small cups. The steam rises gently, carrying a scent that feels both strong and comforting. You pause, if only for a moment, watching the motion. The hand that pours does so without hesitation, each movement practiced, precise. You imagine the taste. Bitter perhaps, but softened with sugar, maybe even milk. A brief warmth that cuts through the heaviness of the air, offering something like clarity before the heat settles more firmly. Nearby, a woman arranges loaves of bread, her hands moving quickly but carefully. Each piece is placed with intention, not stacked carelessly, but set where it can be reached easily. You notice the texture of the crust, the slight variation in shape signs that each loaf carries its own small differences. You continue forward. The ground here is uneven in places worn by constant use. You feel it through your steps, the subtle shifts that remind you this is not a place built for ease, but for function. You adjust without thinking, your pace matching the surface beneath you. A small curious observation from this period notes that markets like these often operated as informal centres of information where news travelled quickly through conversation rather than printed word. People learned what was happening not by reading it, but by hearing it repeated, shaped and passed along. You begin to catch fragments. A shipment delayed, a price changed, a name mentioned, followed by a brief pause that suggests meaning beyond the words themselves. You do not need to understand everything to feel the importance of it. You move past a stall where fruit is stacked in careful arrangements. Oranges, perhaps their surface is catching the light. Bananas slightly green, waiting for their moment. The colours feel richer here, not because they are brighter, but because they are surrounded by the muted tones of woodcloth and early light. You reach out, not touching, but close enough to sense the presence of it. Fresh, temporary, already beginning to change. The air shifts again as you move deeper into the market. Warmer now, carrying more scent, more movement. You feel it settle along your skin, no longer something you notice occasionally, but something that remains. There is a quieter detail that might surprise you. Some vendors, especially those dealing with fish or meat, relied on ice shipped from northern states, stored and used carefully to slow spoilage. It was not perfect and certainly not consistent, but it made a difference, even if only for a few hours. You pass a man who calls out softly, not shouting, but projecting his voice just enough to reach those nearby. His words are not urgent, but inviting. A simple offer repeated with slight variation adjusted depending on who passes. You realize that selling here is not about volume. It is about presence, being seen, being known. You slow your pace. There is no need to hurry through this. A child moves past you, weaving between adults with ease, carrying a small bundle held tightly in both hands. Their steps are quick but careful, as if they understand the importance of not dropping what they carry. You watch as they disappear into the crowd, absorbed into the pattern of movement. You take another breath. The coffee scent lingers. The bread, the faint sharpness of fish, the sweetness of fruit. All of it blends into something that feels distinctly of this place, impossible to separate into individual parts once it settles. A question rises quietly. How much of a city's identity is carried in its food in the daily act of gathering, preparing and sharing? Researchers have long considered whether New Orleans developed its unique culinary culture primarily through necessity shaped by available ingredients and trade, or through deliberate preservation of traditions brought by its diverse population. You sense that it's not one or the other. It's both intertwined in ways that are not easily separated. You step toward the edge of the market again, where the space begins to open back into the street. The light is stronger now, more direct, though still softened by the angle of the morning. Shadows shorten slightly, losing some of their earlier depth. Behind you the market continues. Voices, movement, exchange. Ahead the city stretches outward, carrying this energy into its streets, its homes, its work. You pause for a moment, just long enough to feel the transition. Then you move on the taste of coffee, imagined the rhythm of the market still echoing quietly within you as the day continues to unfold. You leave the market behind though. Its sounds and scents follow you for a while, fading slowly as the streets widen and the air shifts again. The rhythm changes here, less clustered, more directional. You notice how people no longer pause as often. They move with clearer intent, drawn towards something that lies ahead. The river returns to your awareness before you see it, not by sight, by sound, a deeper, broader presence than the voices behind you. A low, constant movement that does not stop, does not vary, simply continues. It draws you forward in a way that feels almost inevitable. As you approach, the space opens once more, and the levee comes into view again, but this time it is no longer quiet. Where earlier there had been only a few figures moving through the dim light, now there is activity everywhere. Men carry loads balanced across their shoulders. Carts roll in steady lines, guided carefully to avoid collision. Voices rise and fall, not chaotic but firm-shaped by the need to be heard over distance and movement. You step closer, careful but curious. A well-established fact is that New Orleans in the 1890s functioned as one of the most important trade gateways in North America, particularly for cotton and sugar produced along the Mississippi Valley. What you are seeing now is not a moment of exception. It is the city at its core. You stand near the edge watching. A ship is moored along the riverbank, its structure towering above the activity below. Ropes stretch from it to the dock, thick and heavy, holding it in place against the slow but powerful pull of the current. You can see figures moving along its deck, their actions coordinated with those on land. Cargo shifts between ship and shore in a continuous exchange. Sacks, crates, barrels, each item handled with care but also with urgency. Not rushed, but steady, as if the work itself cannot afford to pause for long. You notice the way people communicate here. Short calls, gestures, a glance that confirms understanding without words. Everything feels practiced, repeated, refined over time. The ground beneath you is more worn here, marked by constant use. You can see where wheels have passed again and again, leaving shallow grooves that guide the next movement without needing to be followed exactly. Dust mixes with moisture, creating a surface that is neither fully dry nor fully damp. You adjust your footing, slightly feeling the texture beneath your shoes. The air is heavier here, not just warm, but filled with the presence of goods of movement of effort. You catch the scent of raw cotton, faint but distinct. The sweetness of sugar, less obvious but present if you notice it. Wood rope, sweat, river water. All of it combines into something dense, something that settles around you and stays. A man passes close by carrying a sack that rests across his back and shoulder. His steps are steady, controlled, each movement measured to maintain balance. You notice the strain, not dramatic but constant, the kind that builds over hours, not moments. You watch him move away, then turn your attention back to the river. It continues unchanged. There is a lesser-known detail about this trade that lingers beneath the surface. Even after the Civil War, the systems of labour and economic control tied to crops like cotton and sugar remained deeply unequal, shaping who benefited most from this constant flow of goods. What you see as activity and productivity also carries layers of tension that are not immediately visible. You stand there for a moment longer, observing, listening. The sounds blend into a kind of rhythm. Wood against wood, footsteps against ground, voices rising then settling. The occasional sharper noise when something shifts unexpectedly, quickly corrected, then absorbed back into the pattern. You begin to notice how the river itself interacts with all of this. It is not just a background, it is a force. The current moves steadily, pressing against the dock, against the ships, against the very edge of the city. You imagine how it must feel during times of higher water, when that steady pressure increases, when the line between river and land becomes less certain. There is a question that scholars continue to explore. Did the wealth of New Orleans come primarily from its position as a natural port along the Mississippi, or from the complex networks of trade and labour that developed around it? The location made it possible, certainly, but the systems built upon it gave it shape. You are not sure which matters more. Perhaps neither exists without the other. A cart passes behind you, its wheels louder here against the worn ground. The driver calls out, briefly guiding those ahead to shift slightly. The movement adjusts without disruption, each person making small changes that allow the larger flow to continue. You step aside again, feeling how easily you become part of this. Not directing, not resisting, simply adjusting. You look toward the far side of the dock where another ship is being prepared to depart. The activity there is slightly different. Less incoming, more final. Ropes being checked, cargo secured, movements that suggest completion rather than arrival. You imagine where it might go. Downriver, out to sea, carrying with it the products of this place to distant ports where they will be unloaded, sold, transformed into something else entirely. The connection feels vast, beyond what you can see, beyond what you can follow. A small, almost curious belief once held by some dock workers suggested that the river had moods, that its flow could be read like a kind of language if one paid close enough attention. Calm days meant smooth work. Subtle changes in movement hinted at trouble ahead. Whether taken seriously or not, the idea lingers as you watch the water shift. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavier now, the heat beginning to settle more firmly. The the work continuing without pause, you realize that this place does not wait, not for comfort, not for reflection. It moves because it must, and as you stand there feeling the ground beneath you, the air around you, the river beside you, you understand that everything in this city is tied to this moment, this exchange, this constant movement between land and water. You turn slightly, looking back toward the streets you came from, the market, the houses, the quieter rhythms of morning, all of it connected to this. You begin to walk again, slowly at first, then with more certainty carrying with you the weight of what you have seen, the sense that beneath the surface of daily life something much larger is always in motion. You leave the immediate edge of the docks, though the sense of movement stays with you, echoing quietly in your steps. The streets pull you back in, narrowing again, guiding you between buildings that seem to hold the warmth more closely now. The sun has risen higher, not harsh yet, but present enough to shift the feel of everything around you. You notice the voices again, clearer this time, closer, not just sound, but texture. A man speaks in English, his tone direct, practical. Another responds in French, softer, more fluid, the words slipping into each other in a way that feels almost musical. Nearby, a woman calls out in a language you do not immediately recognize, her voice rising and falling in a rhythm that feels familiar even if the words are not. You slow slightly, listening. This is not unusual here. It is expected. A widely accepted understanding of New Orleans in the late 19th century is that it was one of the most linguistically diverse cities in the United States, shaped by centuries of French and Spanish colonial rule, Caribbean influence, and waves of immigration from Europe. What you hear around you is not a mixture in conflict, but a layering that has learned to exist together. You pass a small group gathered near a doorway. Their conversation shifts as you approach, not stopping but adjusting. A phrase begins in English, turns into French midway, then returns again, as if the boundary between languages is not something that needs to be maintained. You wonder briefly what it feels like to think in more than one language at once, to choose words not just for meaning, but for rhythm, for familiarity, for who is listening. You continue forward. The street bends slightly, and with it the light changes again. The sun finds its way between buildings, touching one side of the road while leaving the other in shade. You notice how people adjust their paths instinctively, favoring the shadow where they can, stepping into the light only when necessary. The heat is building, not aggressively, but steadily. You feel it more clearly now along your arms, your face. The air no longer simply surrounds you. It presses gently but persistently, as if reminding you that it will not be ignored. A man walks past carrying a bundle of cloth over his shoulder. The fabric shifts with his movement, revealing glimpses of colour beneath. Blues, reds, patterns that catch the light briefly before settling again. You imagine where it might have come from, imported through the port perhaps, or made locally shaped by the same mix of influences you hear in the voices around you. There is an interesting observation often made about New Orleans during this period. Language was not just a tool for communication, but a marker of identity, class, and community. Who you spoke to and how you spoke could reveal where you belonged or where you did not. You begin to notice this more carefully. The differences are subtle. A certain tone, a particular choice of words, the way a sentence ends. You pass a storefront where two men stand facing each other, their conversation quiet but focused. One gestures with his hands, emphasizing a point. The other listens, nodding slightly, then responds in a different language entirely. There is no confusion, no pause to translate. The exchange continues as if both are moving along the same path from different directions. You move on. The street grows busier, though not crowded in a way that feels overwhelming. People pass at regular intervals, each following their own route, their own purpose. You begin to sense how the city organizes itself without needing clear direction. Paths emerge through repetition, through habit, through shared understanding. A child's voice rises briefly behind you, followed by a softer reply. You turn slightly, catching a glimpse of a small group moving together. The adults speak in one language, that the child in another, switching back and forth with ease that feels almost effortless. You wonder how early that begins, how a place like this shapes the mind before one even realizes it. A lesser-known detail suggests that in some neighborhoods, children grew up speaking multiple languages, naturally learning them through daily interaction rather than formal education. It was not seen as unusual, it was simply how life unfolded. You pause near the shaded corner, letting the movement pass around you. The sounds settle into layers again. Voices, footsteps, the occasional distant call from the direction of the river. All of it connected, all of it continuous. A question lingers quietly. Did this blending of languages create unity, or did it reinforce divisions that were already present? Scholars have long examined whether multilingual environments like this brought people closer together, or simply allowed them to exist side by side without fully merging. You listen more closely, Eddie. The answer is not obvious. There is connection, certainly, but also distance. Moments where understanding flows easily, others where it does not. You push yourself away from the wall and continue walking. The sun is higher now, the light more direct though, still softened by the buildings around you. Shadows shorten slightly, losing some of their earlier depth. The air feels thicker, more settled, as if it has decided on its shape for the day. You pass another open window. This time the sound is clearer. Not just music, but voices joined together, perhaps in song, perhaps in practice. The melody is simple, repeating, but it carries something that feels rooted, something that belongs to this place in a way that does not need explanation. You slow for a moment, listening. Then you move on. The street continues to guide you, bending, slightly opening briefly, then narrowing again. Each shift changes the sound, the light, the feel of the air. You adjust without thinking, your pace matching the space around you. You realize that the city is not just something you walk through. It is something you begin to read, in voices, in movement, in the quiet choices people make without noticing. And as you continue surrounded by words you understand and others, you do not. You feel the rhythm of New Orleans settling deeper into you, not as something you need to interpret, but as something you can simply follow. You move further along the street, leaving behind the shifting blend of voices, though it lingers faintly in your mind, like a pattern you have begun to recognize. The buildings rise a little closer together here, their balconies casting longer stretches of shade that people seem to seek without thinking. The beauty of the place is still visible. The ironwork, the shutters, the careful lines of doors and windows. But beneath it, something else becomes clearer. Work. You begin to notice it in small, steady moments. A woman stands beside a wooden tub, her hands moving through water that reflects the light in soft, broken shapes. Cloth shifts beneath her fingers, lifted, pressed, turned, then lowered again. The motion repeats, not hurried, but continuous. You hear the faint sound of water against wood, a rhythm that blends into the rest of the street. Laundry is not a task that waits, not in this heat, not in this humidity. An established observation about life in cities like New Orleans is that much of the labour that sustained daily comfort was performed in plain view, often by women whose work was constant and physically demanding, yet rarely acknowledged beyond necessity. You pause for a moment watching. She does not look up. Her attention remains on the task. Each movement precise, each action part of something that will continue long after you have moved on. You continue walking. A little further ahead, a man sits near a doorway, tools spread out beside him. He works with careful hands, shaping something small, perhaps leather, perhaps wood. You cannot tell at first, but you notice the focus. The way his head tilts slightly forward, the way his fingers move with quiet certainty. There is no wasted motion, no hesitation. You realize that this kind of work depends on repetition, on skill built slowly over time rather than learned all at once. You pass him quietly. The street shifts again, opening just enough to reveal another layer of activity. A group of workers moves together carrying long pieces of material that require coordination to handle. Their step match, without needing to be discussed, each person adjusting slightly to maintain balance. The effort is shared, the strain divided, yet still present. A small but telling detail from this period is that many of these jobs, whether skilled or not, demanded long hours under difficult conditions, especially in a climate that offered little relief. The day did not shorten because of the heat. It stretched, requiring endurance more than comfort. You feel the air pressing more firmly now, not unbearable, but insistent. It rests along your skin, settles into your clothing, makes each movement feel just slightly heavier than it would elsewhere. You begin to understand why the pace remains measured, why no one rushes unless they must. Energy is something to be managed here, not spent freely. You step into a deeper patch of shade, and the difference, though small, feels immediate. The air is no cooler, but less direct, less demanding. You notice others doing the same, adjusting their paths to follow these narrow bands of relief. Above you, a balcony creaks softly as someone shifts their weight. You glance up and catch a brief glimpse of a figure leaning slightly outward, watching the street below. Not with urgency, not with concern, simply observing. The street is not just a place of movement. It is also a place of watching, of being aware. You move on. A carriage passes slowly, its wheels quieter. Here, cushioned slightly by the worn surface beneath. Inside, you glimpse figures seated in relative comfort, their posture more relaxed than those walking nearby. The contrast is subtle but present. Status reveals itself in small ways, not loudly, but clearly enough. There is an interesting reflection often noted by those who studied this era. The visible charm of New Orleans, its architecture, its atmosphere often depended on layers of labor that remained largely unseen or unspoken in broader narratives. The beauty was real, but it was built upon effort that was not evenly shared. You feel that now, in the steady movements, in the repetition of tasks, in the quiet endurance that shapes the day. You pass a narrow passageway where the air feels momentarily still, as if the space has paused. The ground here is darker, holding on to moisture more easily. You notice how even these small shifts in environment affect how people move, how they choose their paths, how they carry themselves. A voice rises briefly behind you, sharper than the others, then softens again. You do not turn. It resolves quickly, absorbed back into the general flow of sound. Nothing lingers for long here. Everything continues. You walk past another doorway where a woman sits with needle and thread, her hands moving with quiet precision. The fabric rests across her lap, shifting slightly as she works. You notice the way she leans into the light, using it carefully, making the most of what is available before it changes. Time is not marked only by clocks. It is marked by light, by heat, by how long one can work before needing to pause. You slow your pace. There is no need to move quickly. Not in this place. Not in this moment. A question forms quietly. How much of daily life here is shaped by necessity and how much by tradition passed down over time? Some historians continue to explore whether certain routines existed because they worked best in this environment, or because they had always been done that way, carried forward without question. You suspect the answer is not simple. It rarely is. You step back into the street's wider stretch where the light returns more fully. The heat feels stronger here, less interrupted, more direct. You notice how your own movement adjusts again. Slightly slower, slightly more deliberate. The city does not resist the heat. It moves with it. You begin to feel that more clearly now. In your steps, in your breathing, in the way you choose where to walk, where to pause, where to continue. And as you pass beneath another balcony, its shadow stretching just enough to meet you, you realize that the beauty of this place is not separate from the work that sustains it. It is shaped by it, layered with it, and carried forward by it, one steady movement at a time. You continue along the street and the rhythm shifts again, not abruptly, but enough that you feel it in your steps. The flow of people becomes more directional here, less about pausing and exchanging, more about getting from one place to another. The space widens in parts, then narrows again, guiding movement in ways that seem almost unspoken. A mule draws your attention before the cart it pulls comes fully into view. You hear the slow, steady clop of hooves against the ground, followed by the soft creak of wood and harness. The animal moves with a kind of patient strength, head slightly lowered, ears flicking occasionally as it navigates the street. The cart behind it follows obediently, its wheels tracing familiar paths. You step aside without thinking. Others do the same. There is no urgency in the movement, only awareness, a shared understanding of how space must be used. A well-documented aspect of transportation in New Orleans during the 1890s is the continued reliance on animal-drawn vehicles alongside emerging streetcar systems. The transition is gradual, not sudden. Old and new exist together, each filling a role the other cannot yet replace. You watch the cart pass. The driver sits upright, guiding with small adjustments rather than large gestures. He does not rush the mule. There is no need. The pace is already set by the day, by the heat, by the condition of the road beneath them. You step back into the street. The ground here feels uneven again, though in a different way. Not just worn, but shaped by use and weather. Small dips, slight rises, areas where the surface has shifted over time. You imagine how rain would change this, how water would gather, slow movement, alter paths. A carriage approaches from ahead, its presence announced by a slightly sharper sound, the wheels more defined, the structure more enclosed. You move to the side, once more watching as it passes. The figures inside are partially hidden, their faces glimpsed only briefly through the opening. Movement here is not equal. Some travel with effort, others with ease. The difference is quiet but unmistakable. You continue forward. The street curves gently, and with it the light changes again. One side bright, the other shaded. You find yourself drawn to the shadow without needing to think about it. The air feels marginally less demanding there, though still warm, still present. A rail line appears beneath your feet, embedded into the ground, its surface worn smooth by repeated use. You pause for a moment, noticing it. A sign of something newer, something that suggests change, even if that change is slow. In parts of the city, streetcars have begun to replace older forms of transport, offering a more predictable route through the streets. Some are still drawn by animals, others beginning to shift toward new technologies. The system is not complete, not consistent, but it is there shaping how people move. You hear it before you see it. A distant rumble, then the soft metallic sound as wheels meet rail. The streetcar emerges gradually, its movement steady, its path fixed. It does not weave like the carts or adjust like those on foot. It follows its line and everything else shifts around it. You step back, allowing it to pass. The air moves slightly in its wake, not a breeze, but a change, a brief disturbance that settles quickly. You watch as it continues carrying passengers who sit close together, their expressions neutral, accustomed to this way of travel. There is something about it that feels different, more structured, less flexible. You walk on. The street narrows again and the sounds shift with it. Less of the distant rumble, more of the immediate presence of footsteps, voices, the occasional call. You notice how quickly the environment changes from one block to the next, how each space has its own character. A small but telling note from this period suggests that navigating New Orleans required a kind of local knowledge, an understanding of which routes were easier, which became difficult after rain, which offered shade at certain times of day. It was not just about distance, it was about experience. You begin to sense that now, in the way people move without hesitation, in the choices they make that you are only just beginning to understand. You pass a narrow crossing where two streets meet the ground slightly lower there as if it collects something unseen. You imagine water pooling here after a storm, turning the crossing into a small obstacle that must be navigated carefully. A man steps across it with ease, adjusting his stride without breaking pace. You follow more cautious, noticing the difference. You continue forward. The heat is more noticeable now, not overwhelming, but constant. It rests along your shoulders, your back, your face. It does not press harder, but it does not ease either. It simply remains. You hear another cart behind you, slower this time. You glance back briefly, seeing it approach, then step aside again. The movement is becoming familiar now, almost automatic. Adjust, allow, continue. A voice calls out from somewhere ahead, followed by a response that carries just enough to be understood. The exchange is brief, practical, then gone. Everything here seems a function on that level. Enough! No more, no less. You walk beneath another stretch of balconies, their shadows shifting as the sun climbs higher. You notice how the patterns change, how the lines of shade shorten, how the spaces of relief become smaller. Time is moving, not quickly, but steadily. You begin to feel it in a different way now, not just in the light, but in your body, in the slight heaviness of your steps, in the awareness of the air that does not leave. A question lingers quietly. Did the introduction of new transportation methods truly change daily life in a city like this? Or did the environment itself limit how much change could take hold? Some scholars continue to examine whether technological progress here moved differently than in cooler, drier places shaped by conditions that could not be ignored. You are not sure. You only know what you feel. The ground beneath you, the heat around you, the movement that never quite stops. You continue walking, adjusting as you go, following paths that others have already shaped, learning without instruction, simply by being here. And as the street carries you forward once more, you realize that getting from one place to another in this city is never just about distance. It is about how you move, where you step, and how you adapt to everything that moves with you. You continue forward and the day settles into a slower, heavier phase that feels less like movement and more like endurance. The streets are still active, but something has shifted. The energy that carried the morning has softened, stretched thin beneath the rising weight of the afternoon. The heat is no longer something you notice. It is something you inhabit. It rests on your skin, settles into your clothing, fills the space between each breath. Even the air feels thicker now, as if it resists being drawn in. Drawn in too quick. You slow your pace without deciding to. Everyone does. A broadly recognized reality of life in New Orleans during this era is the intensity of its climate, particularly in the warmer months when high humidity and heat shape daily routines more than any clock could. People adjusted not because they wanted to, but because they had to. You move along the shaded side of the street, though the difference is smaller now than it was earlier. The shadows feel thinner, less protective, as if the heat has found its way into them as well. A man sits near a doorway. His posture relaxed, but not entirely at ease. A hat rests low over his face, offering what little shade it can. One hand moves slowly, fanning himself with a folded piece of paper. The motion is steady, repetitive, creating a faint current of air that barely reaches beyond his immediate space. You pass quietly. There is no conversation here. Not much movement, just presence. You notice how the sounds of the city have changed. They are still there, but softened, less layered. Voices are lower now, conversations shorter, as if speaking itself requires more effort than it did in the morning. Even the carts seem to move more slowly, their wheels quieter, their paths more deliberate. You take a breath. The air feels warm as it enters you, offering no relief, only continuation. You become aware of something else. Mosquitoes. Not many, but enough. You feel one brush lightly against your arm, then another near your neck. You move your hand instinctively, brushing them away, though you know it is only temporary. They are part of this place, as constant as the heat, though less welcome. A commonly acknowledged concern of the time is the prevalence of mosquito-borne illnesses, particularly yellow fever, which remained a serious threat in New Orleans well into the 19th century. The connection between mosquitoes and disease was only beginning to be understood, leaving many people uncertain about how best to protect themselves. You feel a subtle tension settle beneath the surface of the day. Not visible, but present. A quiet awareness that something unseen moves alongside everything else. You continue walking. The street ahead appears almost still for a moment, then shifts as someone crosses, then still again. Movement has not stopped. It has simply slowed to match the weight of the air. You pass a small open window where a curtain hangs motionless. Inside, you can see the outline of a figure resting, not asleep perhaps, but still. A pause in the day taken not out of choice but necessity. You understand now why. The body demands it. A curious belief from this period suggests that some residents relied on strong coffee, or even small amounts of alcohol during the hottest parts of the day, not just for refreshment, but as a way to steady themselves against the draining effect of the climate. Whether effective or not, the habit persisted. You move on. The ground feels warmer beneath your feet, holding the heat of the sun more directly now. Each step carries a faint sense of resistance, not from the surface itself, but from the air pressing around you. You reach a corner where the street widens slightly, offering a brief sense of openness. A few people stand there, not speaking, simply occupying the space. One leans against a wall, another sits on a low step. Their stillness feels intentional, as if they have chosen this moment to do nothing at all. You pause as well, not fully stopping, but slowing enough to feel it. The day at its heaviest, the city at its quietest point. A question rises soft and persistent. How did people endure this day after day, year after year without the relief that you might expect elsewhere? Some researchers continue to examine whether acclimatization truly lessened the impact of such heat over time, or whether people simply adjusted their expectations, accepting discomfort as part of daily life. You are not sure. You only know what you feel now. The weight, the stillness, the slow passage of time. You begin to walk again. Your steps are measured not by distance but by comfort. You choose the path that offers the most shade even if it is slightly longer. You adjust your pace to match your breath slower, more deliberate. The city does the same. Everything then moves, but gently, carefully, as if conserving something. You hear a faint nap ahead. Water. Not the river this time. Something smaller. You follow it curious and find a narrow channel where water moves slowly along the edge of the street. It is not clean, not fresh, but it carries a kind of motion that contrasts with the stillness around it. You watch it for a moment, the way it moves, the way it reflects the light. Even this small flow feels as significant now, a reminder that not everything has slowed. You move on. The air shifts slightly as a cloud passes overhead, softening the light for a brief moment. You feel it immediately, a subtle easing, though it does not last long. The sun returns, and with it the full presence of the afternoon. You begin to understand something more clearly. This part of the day is not meant for activity, not unless it must be done. It is meant to be endured, to be moved through slowly, carefully, with attention. You pass another doorway where someone sits with a fan moving it steadily back and forth. The motion is hypnotic, almost soothing, though you know it offers only the smallest relief. Still, it is something. You continue forward your awareness, narrowing slightly, focusing on the immediate. The next step, the next patch of shade, the next breath. The city feels closer now, not larger, but more intimate, as if everything has drawn inward, conserving energy, waiting for something. Evening perhaps, relief however slight. You walk on feeling the weight of the day settle fully around you, understanding that this too is part of life here. Not just the movement, not just the sound, but the stillness, the endurance, and the quiet strength it requires. You keep moving, though more slowly now, and the city begins to shift again in subtle ways. The heaviness of the afternoon still lingers, but there are small signs that something is changing, not cooling yet, not truly, but easing, just enough that movement begins to return. You notice it first in the voices. They grow slightly stronger, not loud, but more willing. A conversation carries a little further down the street than it did before. A laugh rises briefly, then settles, as if testing whether the air will allow it. You follow the sound without thinking, and it leads you toward a narrower lane where the presence of children becomes clear. They move differently, faster, less measured. A boy runs past you barefoot, his steps light despite the heat. Another follows, calling out something you do not fully catch, the words slipping into laughter before they reach you. Their energy feels almost out of place after the slow stillness of the past hour. But it fits, in its own way. A well-grounded observation of this time notes that children in urban areas like New Orleans is often spent much of their day in the streets, especially when not in school, forming their own rhythms within the larger structure of the city. What feels like disruption is in truth part of the pattern. You step aside as they pass. One glances at you briefly, curious, then continues without pause. You watch them for a moment, noticing how they navigate the uneven ground without hesitation, how they shift direction, easily adjusting to obstacles as if they are not obstacles at all. You continue forward. A small building comes into view. Its doorway open, its interior dim compared to the street. You hear voices inside more structured than those outside. Slower, repeating. You pause near the entrance. Inside, a group of children sits at wooden desks, their posture more controlled, their attention directed toward a figure at the front of the room. The teacher speaks the words, measured, clear, repeated just enough to settle. Education here feels different from what you might expect. Less formal, more varied. A recognized detail from this era is that access to schooling in New Orleans depended heavily on class, race, and neighborhood, with some children receiving structured education, while others learned primarily through work or informal instruction. What you see in this room is only one part of a much larger picture. You step back from the doorway. The voices continue behind you, steady, contained. Outside the street offers a different kind of learning. A girl sits on a low step watching the movement around her with quiet attention. She holds something in her hands, perhaps a piece of fabric, perhaps a small object you cannot clearly see. Her fingers move slowly, repeating a motion that suggests practice rather than play. You wonder what she's learning, and how. You move on. The light has shifted again, softer now, though still warm. The edges of shadows begin to stretch slightly, not long yet, but changing. The day is beginning to release its hold, though not all at once. You hear a distant bell, not loud, but clear enough to mark something. Time perhaps, or a signal for those who recognize it. You pass a group of older children gathered near a corner. Their voices are lower, their movements more restrained than the younger ones. They speak in quick exchanges, occasionally glancing toward the street as if aware of more than just their immediate surroundings. There is a sense of transition here, between childhood and something else. Responsibility, expectation. A lesser-known observation suggests that many children in cities like New Orleans began contributing to household work at an early age, balancing moments of freedom with growing duties. The line between play and responsibility was not fixed but shifting. You notice it in their posture, in the way they watch, in how quickly their attention moves from conversation to awareness of what is happening around them. You continue walking. The street begins to fill again, not as it was in the morning, but differently. People return to movement, though still measured, still aware of the lingering heat. The pace increases slightly enough to be felt. You adjust with it. Your steps become a little more certain, a little less heavy. The air remains warm, but something in it feels less still, as if it has begun to move again, even if only slightly. A question forms quietly. How much of childhood here is shaped by freedom and how much by necessity? Researchers have often examined whether the apparent independence of children in such environments reflected opportunity, or simply the demands placed upon families who needed every member to contribute. You watch the children again as you pass. Their laughter, their focus, their quick movements. You sense both freedom and expectation. You walk beneath another stretch of balconies, their shadows longer now, offering more space to step into. You notice how people begin to gather in these areas, again drawn by the slight relief they provide. A woman calls to a child from a doorway, her voice firm but not harsh. The child responds not immediately, but soon enough, shifting direction and moving toward her. The exchange is brief, understood. You continue forward. The sounds of the city begin to layer once more. Not as softly as before, not as fully as the morning, but building. You feel it in the air, in the movement, in the subtle return of energy. The day is not over. Not yet. It is changing. And as you walk, watching the children weave through the spaces between work and rest, you realize that this city does not move in a single rhythm. It moves in many, overlapping, shifting, each one shaping the next. And you, without quite realizing it, have begun to move with them. You continue along the street and the subtle return of movement begins to gather into something more structured. The air is still warm, still present in a way that cannot be ignored, but it no longer feels as heavy as it did before. There is a sense of transition now, as if the day is preparing to turn towards something quieter, more reflective. A bell sounds again, this time closer, clearer. You follow it not with urgency, but with quiet curiosity, letting the sound guide your steps. It leads you toward a larger building, its entrance open, its interior shadowed compared to the light outside. People move in and out, not in haste, but with intention. You pause near the doorway. Inside, the space opens up with the ceiling higher than the rooms you have seen before. Light filters through tall windows, softened by the angle of the sun and the thickness of the glass. The air feels still, not cooler, but calmer, as if the building itself holds a kind of quiet that the street cannot. You step inside. The sound of your movement changes immediately, softer, contained. The echoes are gentle, absorbed by wood, by fabric, by space that is not meant for noise. Rows of benches stretch before you, some occupied, others empty. A few figures sit with heads slightly lowered, hands resting quietly, their presence steady and unhurried. A widely acknowledged feature of life in New Orleans during this period is the central role of religion. particularly Catholicism though. Protestant and other traditions also held strong influence. Churches were not only places of worship, but anchors of community marking time, gathering people, shaping routine. You move further inside your steps instinctively slower. The air carries a faint scent. Wax, wood, something older, something settled. A figure stands near the front, speaking in a voice that does not need to rise to be heard. The words are measured familiar to those listening. You do not need to understand each one to feel their rhythm. There is a stillness here that feels different from the afternoon pause you experienced earlier. That was shaped by heat. This is shaped by intention. You sit or perhaps simply remain standing near the back, letting the space settle around you. A woman nearby moves her fingers slowly, perhaps through beads, perhaps through a quiet gesture repeated over time. The motion is small, almost unnoticed, but steady as if it connects her to something beyond the room. You watch without string. There is no need to intrude. A subtle but meaningful detail from this era is that religious life in New Orleans often reflected the city's layered cultural heritage, blending traditions brought from Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean into practices that were both structured and deeply personal. You begin to sense that now, in the way people move, in the quiet differences between them. Some sit upright, attentive. Others lean slightly forward. A few close their eyes, not asleep but focused inward. You take a slow breath. The air feels different here, not lighter, but less demanding, as if the space allows you to exist without needing to respond. A question forms gently. How much of this is belief, and how much is the comfort of shared ritual of being in a place where the outside world pauses? Even if only briefly, scholars have often considered whether the power of such spaces lies in faith itself or in the structure and calm they provide. You do not try to answer, you simply remain. The voice at the front continues steady, unbroken. It does not rush. It does not anger unnecessarily. It moves forward in a way that feels practiced, as if it has done this many times before. You notice the light shifting again. It enters at a slightly different angle now, catching the edges of the benches, the outlines of those seated. Dust moves through it in slow, drifting patterns, visible only when the light finds it. Time passes, not marked by sound, but by change. You feel your own body settle slightly, your breathing slower, your attention softer. There is no demand here, only presence. A faint sound reaches you from outside. A cart, a voice, muted by the walls. The city continues, but it feels distant. You remain for a moment longer, then begin to move again, rising quietly, stepping back toward the doorway. No one stops you. No one looks directly at you. Your movement is simply part of the flow. As you step outside, the difference is immediate. The air meets you again, warmer, more active. The sounds return, layered, continuous. You pause just beyond the entrance. The bell sounds once more, softer now, marking something you do not fully see. You continue walking. The street feels familiar again, though not the same as before. You carry something of the quiet with you, a slower rhythm that does not disappear immediately. People pass, voices rise, movement resumes, but there is a subtle difference in how you experience it. Less sharp, more observed. You notice a small group gathered near a corner, their conversation calm, their gestures measured. A man leans against the wall, listening more than speaking. A woman adjusts her shawl slightly, then continues her thought without pause. Everything feels connected. Not directly, but through shared time, shared space. You walk on the light, softening further, the shadows stretching just a little more. The day is moving toward evening, though it has not yet arrived. And as you continue, you realize that in this city, moments of stillness are not separate from the movement around them. They are part of it, woven into it, giving shape to everything that follows. You step away from the church and back into the street, carrying a trace of its quiet with you. The air feels different now, not cooler, but less oppressive, as if the day has begun to loosen its grip. Shadows stretch longer across the ground, reaching from balconies and doorways in soft, uneven lines. You walk without hurry. There is no need. The city begins to shift into something else. You notice it first in the sound. A faint note drifts from an open window. Not loud, not clear at first, just a suggestion of melody. You pause slightly, listening, letting it form. It repeats a short phrase, then again, each time a little more confident. Music is not something that waits here. It appears, it lingers, it moves on. A widely accepted understanding is that by the late 19th century, New Orleans had already begun to develop the musical traditions that would later give rise to jazz, shaped by African rhythms, European instruments, and Caribbean influences. What you hear now is not yet named in that way, but it carries the beginnings of it. You move closer to the window, not directly, but enough to hear more clearly. Inside, someone plays a piano. The notes are careful, not rushed, as if the player is practicing rather than performing. A hand pauses, then resumes adjusting, slightly repeating a phrase until it settles. You listen for a moment, then continue. The sound follows you briefly, then fades, replaced by another. A trumpet somewhere further down the street. Short bursts. Not a full melody, but enough to catch your attention. You turn slightly, letting the direction guide you. As you walk, more sounds emerge. A voice singing softly, almost to itself. A rhythm tapped against wood. A string instrument, its tone light and quick. They do not come together in one place. They are scattered, separate, yet connected in a way that feels natural. You begin to understand that music here is not confined to a single space. It moves through the city, through windows, through streets, through people. A small but interesting note from this time suggests that much of the music in New Orleans developed informally, played in homes and courtyards and gatherings that were not always planned. It was learned by listening, by repeating, by being present rather than by formal instruction. You pass a group of men standing near a corner. One holds an instrument, resting it lightly against his side. He speaks to the others, his words casual, his tone relaxed. There is no performance yet, only conversation, but the possibility is there, waiting. You continue walking. The light shifts again, softer now, the brightness easing into something more even. The air still holds warmth, but it feels less fixed, as if it has begun to move again, even if only slightly. You notice how people respond. More movement, more voices. The city begins to open again after the stillness of the afternoon. You pass another open doorway where a small group sits together. One taps a rhythm on the table, another hums quietly, the sound low but steady. The others listen, occasionally adding a note, a word, a sound that fits. There is no structure, no clear beginning or end, yet it works. You pause briefly, watching, listening. There is something about this that feels both casual and important, as if something is being built without being named. A question rises gently. Did music here grow from shared experience, from the blending of cultures and traditions, or from the need to express something that could not be said in other ways? Historians have long examined whether the origins of New Orleans music are best understood as a convergence of influences or as a response to specific social conditions. You do not try to decide. You simply listen. The rhythm continues. The voices shift. The moment passes. You move on. Further down the street, the trumpet sound returns clearer now. You follow it again this time, finding its source more easily. A man stands near a doorway, the instrument raised, his posture relaxed but focused. He plays a short sequence, pauses, then again. The notes are not loud, but they carry. People nearby do not stop completely, but they slow slightly, their attention shifting for just a moment before continuing on. Music here does not demand attention, it receives it. You stand at a distance listening. The sound feels warm, shaped by the air, softened at the edges. It does not cut through the space. It blends into it. You notice how the player adjusts. A slight shift of stance. A change in breath. Each note placed with care, though not with tension. You realize that this is not performance in the way you might expect. It is part of the day, part of the street. You take us a slow breath. The air feels different now, not lighter, but more alive. You begin to walk again, leaving the sound behind, though it lingers in your mind. As you move, other sounds take its place. A door closing, a voice calling, footsteps returning, all of it layered with the memory of music. You understand now that this city does not wait for evening to begin its song. It carries it through the day, quietly, constantly, in pieces that appear and disappear, never fully stopping. You walk beneath another balcony, the shadow longer, now reaching further across the ground. You step into it, feeling the slight difference, the gentle easing that comes with it. The sky above has shifted. Not dark, but changing, the day moving toward something else. And as you continue, the echoes of piano, trumpet voice, and rhythm follow you not as a single melody, but as something more subtle, a presence, a pattern, a beginning. You follow the last notes as they fade, and the street begins to draw you toward a different kind of brightness. Not from the sun now, but from lamps being prepared, from windows opening wider, from a subtle anticipation that settles into the air. The day has not ended yet, something new is already beginning. You notice the change in posture. People stand a little straighter. Voices lift slightly. Movement becomes more fluid, less restrained by the weight of the afternoon. You walk toward a district where the buildings feel closer together, their facades more decorated, their entrances more deliberate. Curtains shift behind windows. Light gathers in pockets where it did not exist before. This is not the quiet return home. This is somewhere else. An established point about New Orleans in the 1890s is the emergence of Storyville, a legally designated district where nightlife, entertainment and vice were concentrated. It was regulated, contained and widely known, though experienced differently depending on who entered it. You slow your pace, not out of caution, but awareness. A woman stands near a doorway, her posture composed, her expression calm. She watches the street without calling out, without moving forward. There is no need. Her presence is enough to suggest what lies beyond the threshold behind her. You pass without stopping. Not everything needs to be entered to be understood. The street carries you further in. Music appears again, but different now, more structured, more intentional. A piano plays inside one building, its rhythm steady, inviting. Laughter follows from within, brief but distinct. In another doorway, voices rise in conversation that feels closer, more private, though still audible from where you stand. You notice the lighting. Gas lamps glow softly, their light warm, uneven, creating shadows that shift with movement. The edges of everything feel less defined now, not hidden but softened. You walk carefully, not because the ground is uneven, but because the space itself feels layered, as if what you see is only part of what exists here. A subtle detail often noted is that Storyville operated under a system of regulation with certain rules intended to control behavior and maintain order, though how effective those rules were remains a matter of discussion. The district was both accepted and criticized its presence, shaping the city in ways that were not always openly acknowledged. You hear music again, closer now. A small group gathers near an open door. Inside, a musician plays with more energy than what you heard earlier in the day. The notes are quicker, more expressive, shaped by an audience that listens and responds. You pause at a distance, watching. The people inside are not still. They move, not wildly, but freely. A shift from the measured pace of the street outside. You feel the difference immediately. The air seems to carry more than heat now. Something else. Expectation. Release. You step back slightly, allowing others to pass. A man enters without hesitation. His path direct, his expression neutral. Another lingers at the edge, considering, then turns away. Each choice feels personal, shaped by reasons you cannot fully see. You continue walking. The sounds overlap now. Music from one building blends with voices from another. Laughter rises, then fades. A door opens, releasing a brief burst of brightness and sound before closing again. You begin to understand how this place exists, not as one space, but as many. Each room its own world, each doorway a boundary. A curious observation from the time suggests that some musicians who played in districts like this would later shape the early forms of jazz, carrying influences gathered in these intimate, lively environments into wider recognition. What feels contained here does not always remain so. You move on. The street bends slightly and the density of activity shifts. Fewer open doors, fewer voices, though the presence remains. You sense that you are near the edge of this district now, where the intensity begins to soften. You take a slow breath. The air feels different again, still warm, but less concentrated. A question lingers quietly. Did places like this provide necessary outlets for expression and release? Or did they reinforce divisions within the city, separating certain experiences from others? Historians continue to examine whether Storyville represented opportunity exploitation or both at once. You do not try to resolve it. You simply walk. The sounds behind you begin to fade. Not entirely, but enough. You step into a quieter stretch of street where the light is softer, the voice is fewer. The transition is gradual, not abrupt, as if the city itself is guiding you back towards something more familiar. You notice your own pace changing again. Slower, more measured. The energy you pass through lingers, but it does not hold you. You carry it with you lightly. You pass beneath another balcony, its shadow now long enough to stretch across most of the street. The air here feels slightly easier though, still warm, still present. A window opens above you. A brief exchange of words follows, then quiet again. Life continues, in many forms, in many spaces. You walk on, leaving behind the brighter lights. The closer sounds the layered world of doorways and music. The city expands again around you, returning to its broader rhythm. And as you move forward, you understand that what you have seen is only one part of it. Not separate, but connected. Another layer, another voice, in a place that never settles into just one way of being. You leave the glow of that district behind, though a trace of its sound lingers like a memory that does not quite fade. The street opens a little, the air feels less crowded, and the movement around you becomes more familiar again. Evening has begun to settle, not suddenly, but with a steady easing that changes how everything feels. You notice the smell first. Warm, rich, inviting. Food. It reaches you before you see it guiding your steps the same way the morning bread once did, though. This time the scent is deeper, more layered. You follow it without thinking, your path shifting gently toward where the street widens and small gatherings begin to form. A broadly accepted feature of New Orleans life in the 1890s is its vibrant food culture shaped by French, Spanish, African and Caribbean influences. Meals are not only about sustenance, they're about identity, memory and routine carried through generations. You step closer. A woman stands beside a small setup near the edge of the street, a pot resting over a low flame. The contents move slowly, releasing a steady aroma that seems to settle into the air rather than pass through it. You cannot see every ingredient, but you sense their presence. Spice. See. Something simmered long enough to blend into itself. You pause for a moment watching. Her movements are calm, practiced. She stirs without haste, adjusts the heat with small motions, checks the surface with a glance that tells her everything she needs to know. This is not rushed cooking. It is patient, deliberate. You move on. Further down, another stall offers something different. Bread again, but paired with something savory this time. A man slices, assembles, hands it over with a brief exchange of words. The motion repeats, steady, efficient, shaped by demand that comes in small waves rather than constant flow. You notice how people gather, not in large crowds, but in clusters, small groups, individuals who pause, eat, speak quietly, then move on. The street becomes a place of brief wars, a moment within the day that allows something softer to take hold. There is an interesting detail from this time. Many of the dishes that would later become iconic in New Orleans were already present in some form, though not always named or recognized as they are today. They existed as part of daily life, evolving slowly, shaped by what was available and who was preparing them. You take a slow breath. The air feels different now, still warm, but carrying more comfort. You pass a doorway where a family sits together at a table just inside. The light from within spills gently onto the street, illuminating the edges of their movement. You hear voices, quiet but steady, the rhythm of conversation that comes from familiarity rather than formality. You do not stop, but you notice the way they sit, the way they pass items across the table, the small pauses between words. This is not performance. It is routine. You continue walking. A man leans against a wall, eating slowly, his attention drifting between the food in his hands and the movement of the street. He does not rush. There is no need. The pace of the evening allows for this. You begin to feel it yourself. A slight release, not from the heat entirely, but from the pressure of the day. Your steps become softer, less measured, more natural. You pass another small gathering where a pot is shared among a few people standing close together. Each takes a portion, speaks briefly, then steps back. The exchange is simple, but it carries something more than just food. Connection. presence, a sense of being part of something even if only for a moment. A lesser-known observation suggests that street food in New Orleans often served as a bridge between different communities, allowing people of varying backgrounds to share in a common experience, even if other parts of life remain divided. You notice that now, in the way people stand near each other. Not separate, but not fully together either. A quiet balance. You walk on. The light continues to change, softening further the sky above, shifting toward deeper tones. Lamps begin to glow more clearly now, their presence no longer subtle but necessary. You pass beneath one, its light warm against your face, then step beyond it into shadow again. The contrast feels gentle, not sharp. You hear a voice calling from behind a stall, offering something you do not fully catch. Another responds, a brief exchange that ends in agreement. The movement continues. Everything flows, without force, without urgency. You begin to understand something more clearly. Evening here is not a sudden shift. It is a transition, from work to rest, from effort to ease, from heat to something slightly more forgiving. A question forms quietly. How much of this food, these routines, these small gatherings is shaped by tradition carried across generations, and how much by the immediate needs of the day? Scholars often reflect on whether New Orleans cuisine developed as a preservation of heritage or as a practical response to environment and resources. You suspect once again that it is both. You continue walking, the spells lingering, the sounds softening, the light fading just enough to change the feel of everything around you. The city does not slow completely, but it shifts, and you moving through it feel that shift settle into you as well. The day is not over, but it has changed, and as you step forward, leaving behind the small fires, the shared meals, the quiet exchanges you carry with you, the sense that this city feeds itself not only with food, but with moments like these. Simple, steady, and quietly sustaining. You continue along the dimming street, and the warmth of food and conversation settles behind you like a gentle echo. The light has softened further now, no longer competing with the day, but replacing it in quiet layers. Lamps glow more steadily. Windows shine with a muted warmth, and the spaces between buildings deepen into shadow. You begin to notice something else. Not in sound, not in smell, but in the way people move. Subtle shifts. A hesitation at certain corners, a glance before stepping into particular streets. The city feels the same, but also different. A well-established reality of New Orleans in the 1890s is that social boundaries shaped daily life in ways that were often unspoken but clearly understood. Race, class, and status influenced where one could go, how one was treated, and what kind of life was possible. You feel that now, not as something declared, but as something present. You pass a group standing near a doorway, their conversation low, their posture relaxed. They do not acknowledge you directly, but you sense awareness, a quiet recognition of presence that does not need to become interaction. You continue walking. A carriage moves slowly past its occupants, partially hidden behind the structure, their faces visible only in brief glimpses of light. Their pace is measured, their movement contained separate from those on foot. You notice the difference, not dramatic, but consistent. You step further into a quieter street where the sounds of the busier areas fade slightly. The buildings here are similar in form, but something about them feels more contained. Doors close more quickly, windows open less widely. The sense of openness you felt earlier is reduced. You slow your pace, not out of uncertainty, but awareness. There is a detail often noted by those who studied this time. The rules that governed social interaction were not always written, but they were widely understood. People learned them through experience, through observation, through the consequences of crossing them. You begin to sense those boundaries in the spaces between people, in the choices they make, in the paths they follow. You pass a man who steps aside slightly as you approach, not fully moving out of the way, but adjusting just enough to allow you to pass without contact. The gesture is small but deliberate. You respond in kind, shifting your own path slightly. The exchange is silent, but clear. You move on. A voice rises briefly from a nearby window, then lowers again, as if aware of how far it carries. The tone is controlled, measured, shaped by more than just the words themselves. You begin to understand that communication here is not only about what is said, but how. And where you walk beneath another balcony, its shadow now long enough to stretch across the entire street. You remain within it as long as possible, the slight easing it offers still welcome even as the evening air grows more bearable. The heat has not disappeared, but it has softened. You feel it less as pressure, more as presence. A quieter detail from this period reveals that even within a city known for its cultural blending, divisions remained strong, influencing access to housing, work, and public spaces. The closeness of different communities did not always mean equality, but it did create a complex and layered social landscape. You notice how this plays out in movement. Who walks where? Who pauses? Who continues? Nothing is announced, yet everything is understood. You pass a small gathering where conversation flows easily, laughter rising briefly, then settling. The group appears comfortable, familiar with one another, their space clearly defined. A few steps later, another group stands in silence, their presence more reserved, their attention focused inward rather than outward. The contrast is subtle, but present. You continue forward. The street bends slightly, and with it the sense of openness returns just a little. You feel the shift, the easing, as if you have moved from one layer of the city into another. You take a slow breath. The air feels calmer now, the sound softer, the movement more even. A question forms quietly. How did people navigate these invisible boundaries, learning where they could move freely and where they could not? Scholars have long explored whether such systems were maintained more by formal enforcement or by shared understanding reinforced through daily life. You sense that both played a role. You walk on, the lamps are both. You glow steadily now, their light creating small circles of clarity within the growing darkness. You move from one to the next, your path shaped by these pockets of illumination. Between them the shadows deepen. You notice how your attention sharpens slightly in those darker spaces, then relaxes again when you step back into the light. The city continues, not loudly, not quietly, but steadily. You pass another doorway where a figure stands partially inside, partially out, as if uncertain whether to remain or to move. The hesitation lasts only a moment, then resolves the figure, stepping fully into the street and continuing on. You follow your own path, not directed, but aware. You begin to understand that this city is not only shaped by what is visible, but by what is felt, what is known without being spoken, what is followed without being explained. And as you move through the shifting light, the quiet exchanges the subtle adjustments of those around you. You realize that living here is not only about navigating the streets, it is about understanding the spaces between them. You continue forward, and the street begins to open again, though in a different way than before. The buildings feel lower here, the air less confined, and the sky stretches wider above you. The evening has settled more fully now, not dark yet, but deepening the last light of day, thinning into softer tones. You notice it first in the distance, a shift in the air, a faint movement that is not quite wind, but not stillness either. You walk toward it. The river is not far. You can feel it before you see it. The space broadens, the sounds change, and the presence of water returns steady and constant. The Mississippi moves as it did in the morning, and changed in its rhythm, though everything around it has shifted. You step closer to the levee again. The activity here is quieter now than it was earlier, but not absent. A few figures remain, their work slower, their movements more measured. The urgency of the day has passed, replaced by tasks that can wait until tomorrow, or that must be finished before rest. A well-grounded observation is that life along the river never fully stopped, even at night. While the busiest hours belonged to the day, the flow of goods and movement continued, shaped by schedules that did not always align with sunlight. You stand for a moment looking out across the water. The surface reflects the fading sky, broken only by the steady current. Lights begin to appear along the edges, small at first, then more numerous, marking the presence of boats, of structures of life continuing along the river's path. You take a slow breath. The air feels different here, still warm, but moving. A slight shift that carries with it the scent of water, of earth, of something that feels older than the city itself. You notice the levee beneath your feet, firm, deliberate, holding back what lies beyond. It feels solid, reliable, though you are aware in a quiet way of how much depends on it. There is a detail that often goes unnoticed. Much of New Orleans sits at or below sea level, relying on levees and drainage systems to manage the constant presence of water. The balance is maintained, but never without effort. You look out again. The river does not pause. It does not change its pace to match the city. It simply continues. You turn slightly, noticing the sky above. Clouds gather at the edges, faint at first, then more defined. The air carries a hint of something new, a subtle tension that was not present before. Storm, not certain, but possible. You feel it in the way the air shifts and the slight change in pressure that you cannot fully explain but recognize all the same. You watch as a man nearby looks toward the same horizon, his expression thoughtful, his posture still. He does not speak, but you sense that he sees it too. A quiet observation from this period suggests that those who lived along the river often developed a keen awareness of weather patterns, reading subtle signs in the sky, the air, the movement of water. It was not formal knowledge, but experience built over time. You remain where you are. The city behind you continues. Voices, footsteps, distant music, all softened by the open space. The river holds your attention, its movement steady, its presence constant. You begin to understand something more clearly. This city is not separate from the river. It is shaped by it, defined by it, dependent on it. A question forms gently. How much of New Orleans' identity comes from its relationship with this water, and how much from the people who have learned to live beside it? Scholars continue to explore whether the river dictated the city's character, or whether the city shaped its own response to the river's demands. You do not try to answer. You simply watch. The light fades further. The lamps along the levee grow brighter in contrast. The sky deepens. The air shifts again, slightly cooler though still warm enough to remind you where you are. You turn away from the water, slowly, carrying with you the sense of its presence. You begin to walk back toward the streets where the city gathers once more, where the spaces close in, where the sounds become more immediate again. Behind you the river continues, unchanged, uninterrupted. Ahead the city waits, not still, but steady. You step forward, feeling the ground beneath you, the air around you, the quiet awareness of something larger that moves alongside everything else. And as you leave the open space of the levee, you understand that this place is always balanced between two forces, land and water, each shaping the other, each never fully at rest. You step back into the tighter weave of streets, leaving the wide breadth of the river behind you. The city gathers again around your shoulders, though now it feels softer, more open to small moments of gathering. Evening has settled into its fuller shape. Lamps glow steadily. Windows hold warm light. Voices drift in gentle clusters that rise and fall without urgency. You begin to hear a different kind of rhythm, not from a single place, but moving, approaching, a low pulse of drums, steady and measured, carried through the streets before you can see where it comes from. It does not rush toward you. It arrives gradually, as if the city itself is letting it through. You follow the sound. Others do the same. Not in a crowd, not yet, but in small adjustments of direction, in pauses that turn into steps and glances that confirm what is already understood. A carefully noted aspect of life here is the importance of public celebration, especially parades and processions that marked holidays, community events, and shared traditions. These gatherings were not rare interruptions. They were part of the city's identity, woven into its calendar and its sense of belonging. You turn a corner and see it. A small procession moves along the street, not large, not overwhelming, but present in a way that draws attention without demanding it. Musicians walk in a loose line, their instruments catching the lamplight. A drum keeps the pace. A horn answers. Another follows. The sound is not loud, but carries. People gather along the edges. Some stand still, others move slowly alongside. Children weave in and out, their energy returning fully, now that the heat has eased. You watch one skip ahead, then fall back, again adjusting to the rhythm without needing instruction. You step closer, not into the center, but near enough to feel it. The music moves through you, not sharply, but steadily, like a second pulse that settles alongside your own. You notice how each person responds differently. A man nods his head slightly, keeping time. A woman taps her hand against her side, her expression calm but engaged. Another simply watches, still and attentive, as if holding the moment rather than joining it. You walk alongside for a few steps, then a few more. The ground beneath you feels familiar now, though the light has changed how you see it. Shadows stretch and shift with each movement of the lamps. Faces appear briefly in brightness, then fade again into softer outlines. A curious detail from this time is the presence of social clubs and mutual aid societies that often organise such processions, blending celebration with community support. These groups provided not only music and gathering, but also assistance in times of need, creating networks that extended beyond the visible moment. You sense that here, in the way people stand together, in how they recognise one another, in the quiet exchanges that happen at the edges of the music. You continue walking. The procession moves at its own pace, not hurried, not delayed. It turns gradually, following a path that feels known, even if you do not know it yourself. You let it lead for a while, then step aside, allowing it to pass. The music lingers as it moves on, fading slowly, not disappearing at once. The rhythm remains in the air, carried through the street, reflected in small movements even after the instruments are no longer in sight. You stand for a moment, listening, then turn and continue. The street ahead feels quieter, though not empty. The energy of the procession has shifted the space, leaving behind a kind of echo that settles gently. You notice how people begin to move again, returning to their paths, resuming conversation, but with something added, a lightness, a shared moment that does not need to be spoken about to be understood. You walk beneath another lamp, its glow steady now against the deepening sky. The air feels slightly cooler, or perhaps just less heavy. You're no longer aware of it in the same way you were earlier. You take a slow breath. The city feels different again, not quieter, but calmer. A question forms softly. What purpose do these gatherings serve beyond celebration? Scholars have often reflected on whether such processions were expressions of joy, acts of resistance, or ways of maintaining identity in a city shaped by constant change. You consider it as you walk. The answer does not settle easily. It may not need to. You continue forward, the sounds of the procession now distant, replaced by the quieter rhythm of evening streets. A door opens, a voice calls, footsteps pass, all of it steady, familiar. You realise that this city does not separate work, rest and celebration into distinct parts. They overlap, blend, flow into one another. You feel it in your steps, in the way you move without thinking, in the way you pause without deciding. And as you walk on, leaving behind the fading rhythm of drums and horns, you understand that moments like that are not interruptions to daily life here. They are part of it, carried forward, remembered, and ready to return again. You continue along the street, and the last traces of the procession settle into memory, replaced by a quieter, steadier rhythm that belongs to the later hours. The city does not fall silent. It shifts into something more focused, more deliberate, as if those who remain outside now do so with purpose. The lamps guide your path. Small circles of light, between them deeper shadow. You move from one to the next without thinking your pace, even your attention settled into the immediate. The sound of the river is distant now, but another kind of movement takes its place. Night work. You begin to notice it in the figures ahead. A man pushes a cart loaded with crates, his step steady, his attention fixed forward. Another follows, carrying tools that catch the light briefly as he passes beneath a lamp. Their movements are quieter than those of the daytime workers, but no less necessary. An established observation about cities like New Orleans is that much of their essential labour continued after dark, especially in areas tied to trade, food and transport. The day did not end so much as it changed hands. You walk alongside this quieter activity, not interrupting, not joining, simply moving within it. A door opens to your right, releasing a brief burst of light and warmth. Inside you glimpse a kitchen, a figure working over a surface, hands moving quickly, efficiently. The door closes again and the light disappears, leaving only the memory of it. You continue forward. The air feels easier now, still warm, but no longer pressing. You breathe more fully, noticing the difference. A group of men stands near a corner, their conversation low, their posture relaxed, but alert. One leans against a wall, another rests a hand on a crate beside him. Their voices carry just enough to be heard, but not enough to draw attention. They are not idle, they are waiting. A lesser-known detail from this period suggests that night hours were often used for tasks that required less interruption or for work that could not be completed during the day's heavier traffic. The city found ways to use every part of its time. You pass them quietly. One glances in your direction, then returns his attention to the conversation. The exchange is brief, almost automatic. You move on. The street narrows again and the sounds soften with it. Footsteps echo slightly more here, contained by the closeness of the buildings. You notice how your own movement becomes more careful, more deliberate, as if the space encourages it. A figure approaches from ahead, carrying something wrapped in cloth. You step slightly to the side, allowing them to pass without contact. The gesture is small but understood. The exchange happens without words. You continue. A faint metallic sound reaches you from somewhere ahead. You follow it curious and find a small workshop still open, its door partially raised. Inside, a man works at a bench shaping something with steady repeated motions. The light from within spills onto the street, creating a narrow path of brightness that fades quickly into shadow. You stand for a moment watching. The work is precise, focused, unaffected by the time of day. You notice how the rhythm of his movement mirrors the earlier rhythms you have seen throughout the city. Different task. Same pattern, steady, continuous. You move on. The street opens slightly, revealing another cluster of activity. A vendor still stands at his post, offering what remains of his goods to the few who pass. His voice is softer now, less insistent, but still present. A transaction takes place. Brief, efficient. Then both parties move on. The city continues, not loudly, not quietly, but steadily. You begin to feel a sense of calm settle more fully into you. The movement around you no longer feels layered or complex. It feels simple, direct, each action connected to a clear purpose. You walk beneath another lamp, its glow steady, its light warm against your face. You pause for a moment, then continue into the shadow beyond. A question forms gently. How much of this nighttime activity was planned? And how much emerged naturally from the needs of the day? Scholars often consider whether cities like New Orleans developed these patterns intentionally, or whether they arose over time, shaped by necessity and habit. You suspect the answer lies somewhere in between. As it often does, you continue walking. The sounds grow fewer now, not absent, but spaced. A car in the distance, a voice from behind a closed door. The soft rhythm of your own steps. You begin to notice the sky more clearly, darker now. The first stars faintly visible, though softened by the glow of the city below. You take a slow breath. The air feels calm, settled. You pass another doorway where light glows softly from within. Voices drift out low and steady, suggesting conversation that will continue long into the night. You do not stop. You simply pass, carrying the sense of it with you. You realize that this part of the city is not meant to be seen all at once. It reveals itself in pieces, in quiet moments, in steady work, in small exchanges that hold the structure of daily life together. You walk on your pace, unhurried, your attention soft. And as the street carries you forward through the deeper hours, you understand that even in its quietest moments, this city does not rest completely. It continues, always, in ways both seen and unseen. You continue walking and the city begins to draw inward again, not through noise or movement, but through quiet. The streets feel more settled now, the activities spaced farther apart, each sound carrying a little more clearly because there is less to compete with it. The lamps still guide you, but the spaces between them feel deeper. You step into one circle of light, then another, your path steady, your pace unhurried. The air is warm but no longer demanding. It rests lightly now, as if the day has finally released its hold. You turn down a narrower street where the buildings stand close and the sound soften further. A window above you is open just enough to let a line of light fall across the wall opposite. You hear voices inside, low and steady, the rhythm of conversation that belongs to people who are no longer working, but not yet asleep. You pause briefly, not to listen closely, but to notice the tone, the calm. Then you continue. A widely recognized feature of daily life in this era is the importance of the home as a place of retreat at the end of the day where the outside world softened. and personal routines took over. What you pass now are not public moments, but private ones glimpsed only in fragments. You move further along. A door stands slightly open, and through it you catch the faint glow of candlelight. Inside, a figure sits at a table, head bent over something in their hands. Writing, perhaps? Or reading? The movement is slow, deliberate, shaped by the limits of the light. You notice how the space feels contained, protected, separate from the street. You walk on. The sounds of the city are now distant. A cart far away, a voice carried faintly. The rest is quiet. You feel your own steps more clearly, the contact of your foot with the ground, the slight shift of your weight. Everything so being slows. You pass beneath another window where a curtain moves gently, stirred by air you cannot quite feel. Behind it a shadow crosses, then pauses, then disappears again. Life continues inside, out of view. A small and intriguing detail from this time suggests that many people relied on simple evening routines to bring a sense of order to the day. Lighting candles at a certain hour, closing. Shutters preparing for rest in ways that repeated night after night. These patterns offered stability in a world that could otherwise feel uncertain. You begin to sense those routines now, in the timing of light, in the closing of doors, in the gradual quieting of voices. You continue walking. The street bends slightly and you follow it, not needing to know where it leads. The path itself feels enough. You are no longer moving towards something specific. You are simply moving within the last stretch of the day. You take a slow breath. The air feels soft, settled. A question forms quietly. What did the end of the day mean to those who lived here after hours shaped by heat work and constant movement? Some historians reflect on whether evening brought true rest or simply a different kind of labour within the home, less visible but equally present. You consider it as you walk. The answer feels layered. For some, perhaps rest. For others, continuation. You pass a small group seated outside a doorway, their chairs angled toward one another. Their conversation is low, unhurried, shaped by familiarity. They do not look at you as you pass, not out of indifference, but because their attention is already held within their shared space. You move on. The lamps behind you dim slightly as distance grows. Ahead, fewer lights remain. The street feels quieter, more contained, as if it is preparing to sleep. You notice how your own movement changes. Slower, softer. Your steps make less sound. Your attention narrows. You pass another house where the shutters are being closed. The motion is careful, deliberate, each panel secured in place. The light inside shifts, then disappears as the final opening is covered. The street darkens slightly. You continue. A final window glows ahead, its light steady but faint. You pass beneath it, catching only a glimpse of the room within. A bed, a chair, the outline of a figure already resting. You do not linger. You move on. The city feels distant now, not gone, but quiet. Held in a kind of pause, you take another slow breath. The air remains warm but gentle. The sounds are few, the movement minimal. You realize that this is the final layer of the day. Not empty, but complete. And as you walk through these quieter streets where light fades and sound settles, you understand that the city does not stop. It simply softens, drawing inward, preparing for what comes next. You continue walking though. Now there is no real destination guiding you. The streets have grown quieter, the movement gentler and the light softer still. What remains of the city reveals itself in small, steady details rather than broad impressions. A single lamp hums faintly above you. Its glow is warm, contained, reaching only as far as it needs to. Beyond it, the darkness is not complete, but it is deeper, more settled. You move through it slowly, your steps softer than before, as if the night itself encourages you to quiet. The air rests lightly against you, still warm, but no longer demanding. You take a slow breath, and for the first time since morning it feels easy. A widely accepted reflection on cities like New Orleans is that their true rhythm is not found in any single moment, but in the way each part of the day flows into the next, creating a continuous cycle rather than separate pieces. What you have moved through has not been a series of events, but a single unfolding experience. You turn down another street narrower than the last, where the buildings stand close and the shadows feel almost complete. A faint line of light escapes from beneath a door, just enough to mark that someone inside remains. Oh, you pause, not out of your curiosity, but to feel the stillness. There is no urgency now, no movement that requires your attention, only presence. You begin to notice the smallest sounds, a distant footstep, the faint creak of wood settling, the quiet shift of air that moves between the buildings without announcing itself. Each sound appears, then fades, leaving space behind it. A small and thoughtful detail from this period is that night in cities like New Orleans was often marked not by complete silence, but by a softer continuity of life where even rest carried the traces of what had come before. You walk on, your pace is slower now, not because you're tired, but because there is no reason to move quickly. The path ahead is clear, though dim, and your steps fall into a rhythm that feels almost automatic. You pass beneath another lamp, its light briefly outlining your movement before you return to shadow. The contrast is gentle, not sharp. You do not need to adjust. Everything feels balanced. You think back not in detail but in impression. The river at dawn, the market in the morning, the wait of the afternoon, the music that rose without warning, the quiet of the evening. All of it still present, though softened, as if the day has settled into memory even as you remain within it. A question lingers softly. What remains of a day once it has passed, especially in a place that continues so steadily, so constantly? Scholars sometimes consider whether the identity of a city is shaped more by its grand events, or by the repetition of ordinary moments that accumulate over time. You feel the answer without needing to define it. It is here, in the repetition, in the rhythm, in the quiet continuity that does not ask to be noticed. You continue walking. The street begins to feel more familiar, though you cannot say why. Perhaps it is not the place itself, but your movement within it that has changed. You no longer observe from the outside. You move as if you belong, even if only for this moment. You take another slow breath. The air is calm. The night settled. The city at rest, though never fully still. And now, as the last light fades from the edges of the street, you allow your pace to slow even further. You do not need to go anywhere. You do not need to see anything more. You simply continue step by step until even that begins to matten. Your shoulders release the weight they carried. Your hands rest more easily at your sides. Your breathing becomes steady, even unforced. The sounds around you grow quieter, still not disappearing but moving further away as if the world itself is gently stepping back. You pass one final doorway, its light dim, its presence soft. You do not look inside, you do not need to. You continue forward, and then gradually, without effort, you allow yourself to stop. Not suddenly, but naturally, as if the day has led you here, to this quiet, to this stillness, to this moment where nothing more is required. The city continues, somewhere, softly, but not for you. You are already stepping away from it, letting it fade, letting the sound settle, letting the warmth of the air become something distant. Your breathing remains slow, even, unforced, and as the last impressions of the street dissolve into the quiet, you feel the day release you completely. There is nothing left to follow, nothing left to hold, only rest. Only stillness, only the gentle sense of having moved through something complete. You lie there now, or perhaps you imagine that you do, the weight of the day no longer pressing the rhythm of the city, replaced by something softer. The air, once heavy, feels distant, as if it belongs to another time, another place. Your thoughts move more slowly, not forming in sharp lines, but drifting like the river you once stood beside. The sounds have faded, not gone, just far away. A faint echo of movement, a memory of voices, but nothing that asks for your attention. Your body rests, supported, still. Each breath comes easily now, without effort, without awareness of the heat that once shaped every moment. The streets, the music, the quiet exchanges all settle into a gentle background that no longer needs to be understood. You do not need to follow the city anymore. You have already moved through it. You have felt its rhythm. And now you can let it go. Your shoulders sink a little deeper. Your hands relax. The last small tensions fade without needing to be released. Everything softens. The light, the sound, the sense of time itself. And as you rest there, carried by the quiet, the city becomes something distant, something that continues without you, steady and unchanged. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to think about. Only this calm, only this stillness, only this gentle drift into rest. Sweet dream.